Hello and welcome to the second week of Logic and Critical Thinking and the lecture series associated with it. Today we're going to be thinking about thinking critically, carrying on from last week's discussion about thinking in general. Okay, so to kind of recap what we were discussing last week and beginning on our journey and understanding the process and ideas behind critical thinking, thinking is the way that you make sense of the world, right? It is the way in which you take the inputs that are available to you and the way you logically process out and come to conclusions about the world around you. So, thinking critically is going to be uh, all about thinking about how uh, you're going to be able to essentially clarify and improve the thinking that you have. So, thinking critically is all about refining the thinking process, refining the way that you make sense of the world. Okay. So, a couple of characteristics of a critical thinker are that critical thinkers they think actively, right? It goes beyond simply, taking in the information uh, that is presented to them, but actually going about asking the right questions, given the circumstances, in order to be able to clarify any information that perhaps is going to be missing from the context or otherwise based on the information that is immediately available. Okay. Critical thinkers carefully explore situations with questions, as I just said. So it's all about going in and getting the information that wasn't necessarily immediately presented to them. Okay? Critical thinkers view situations from different perspectives. So they always consider the alternatives, they always consider the perspectives of individuals that might have different viewpoints from them, um, and factor that in and take that information to see if there's any way that their own positions can be improved by looking at things through a different lens. Critical thinkers support different perspectives with reasons and evidence. So, simply a gut feeling is not going to cut it in the world. You have to be able to support the arguments that you make as a critical thinker, and that requires reasons, which means logically sussing out what it is that leads you to come to the conclusion that you come to, or having direct evidence, having data that would suggest, or in some cases, definitively assert the types of arguments that you are making. A critical thinker discusses ideas in an organized way, right? So there is a method to the madness, there is a process, there is a general understanding of understanding ideas, understanding problems, understanding situations and phenomena, and then presenting that information in a bit of a systematic way that encompasses the rationale behind why ideas are accepted or rejected as they are, the methods that go into the reasoning process and the collection of data and evidence to be able to assert things, any analysis of that evidence, and then, of course, the ultimate conclusions that are arrived at by the individual doing the thinking. And then, of course, critical thinkers analyze issues, right? So they go beyond simply accepting things at face value, but go into the specifics about, again, what are the reasons why certain conclusions are gotten to, and what is the ultimate process that led you to get to those conclusions. Okay. So, chief of the skills of a critical thinker is the ability to be able to think actively. Okay. So when you think actively, you are going beyond simply passively taking in information. You're getting involved, right? You're taking initiative in making decisions. So you're going beyond simply sitting back and processing information, but rather actively moving forward in the process to be able to attempt to make the decisions that need to be made regarding the phenomenon that you're exploring. Okay. Uh, if you're thinking actively, you have to follow through on commitments. So if you're going to suggest to somebody that you're going to be exploring a particular avenue or collecting certain types of evidence, those are going to be the things that you need to do in order to be considered a worthy um, and in order to be considered an individual who can be trusted at their word to have thought through the process in an active fashion, essentially. Okay, and then an active thinker is also going to take responsibility for the consequences of the decisions that they ultimately make, right? So things, again, go beyond simply being passive, but offering your own suggestions, offering your own solutions to potential problems, perhaps. Um, Looking at courses of action and policies and programs and perhaps even legislation and suggesting ways that they can be approved upon. And if things don't necessarily work out the way that you intended, at least you'll have that solid thinking as the basis for coming to your conclusions and, of course, potentially finding alternative solutions in the event that there is something lacking in the chosen solution that you went with. So active thinking is one of the keys to effective learning, right? So a big part of the learning process is this idea that you are thinking actively, that you are trying to go from simply a cursory understanding of something to be able to be analytical, evaluative, and even creative with the information that has been presented to you so that you can apply that information in some sort of a meaningful um, manner. And this brings us to Benjamin Bloom and the idea of the 6 categories of questions and Bloom's taxonomy, which we're going to be getting to in a little bit here as well. Okay, so very popular in education. The idea that there are different levels of learning and there are different levels of the elements of learning, including the process of questioning. So, questions can be classified in terms of the ways that people organize and interpret information. So, the 6 categories of questions, according to Bloom, are fact, interpretation, analysis, synthesis, evaluation, and application. Okay, so at its core level, questions of fact are trying to get the basic procedural and solid elements of whatever is being inquired about, whatever the phenomenon is that is being explored. Questions of interpretation go a little bit further because there are often multiple perspectives on different facts. Interpretation questions allow somebody to essentially apply the fact given a set of circumstances in order to be able to see the different perspectives that exist regarding the phenomenon at hand. Next is the notion of analysis, which is taking information, taking evidence, and following a set process for using that information to be able to come to conclusions. Synthesis is taking your conclusions and finding contrary information, in other words, a thesis, and then finding antithetical information and combining the two in order to synthesize or to create a new understanding. So a synthesis question would be one that tries to seek out both the thesis and antithesis or antithesis information in order to be able to find out if there's a way that two opposing viewpoints perhaps can be reconciled and come to a new way of looking at a problem or some sort of a phenomenon. Evaluation is the next type of question, and that is all about examining the applicability, the feasibility, and the general magnitude of the impact of decisions that have been made. Are things going smoothly? Are things doing what they're supposed to be doing? These are the kinds of questions that one might ask in terms of evaluation. And then, of course, inquiring about the level of knowledge that people potentially would have about a subject as well would be in line with the idea of evaluation. So, for example, a quiz or a test that one would take in a class would be an evaluative kind of a question as well. And then finally, we have application, right? Taking the information and asking questions about how they can be utilized in a pragmatic fashion. How can they be applied to achieve some sort of an end? Okay. And then we get to Bloom's taxonomy. So different levels, again, of understanding, different ways of applying knowledge that has been gained, starting with simple recall and remembering. So that is all about recalling facts and basic concepts, and some of the taxonomy or the words that are utilized to express those kinds of ideas or applications of knowledge are to define, duplicate, list, memorize, repeat, and state basic facts. So going back to the different types of questions that can be asked. Remembering is all about remembering the facts, remembering the solid details. Next comes understanding, okay? And that's all about explaining ideas, explaining concepts. So that is classifying ideas, describing ideas, discussing them, explaining them. In some cases, identifying different elements or different applications of the concepts, locating, recognizing, reporting, selecting, and translating these kinds of ideas and concepts. Next up comes the application stage, and applying would be the level of knowledge application in that sense. So that would be using the information in new situations. So executing, implementing, solving, using the information to come to conclusions about things, using the information, demonstrating the information, interpreting, operating, scheduling, sketching, different things that allow you to utilize the information to be able to have a use beyond simply the basic understanding of what's going on. The next level, analysis. So this is all about drawing connections among the ideas. So differentiating, organizing, relating. Then, of course, very popular terms, comparing and contrasting, where you're saying ways in which things are similar and dissimilar. Distinguishing, examining, experimenting, questioning, and testing as well. Then we get to evaluation. So evaluating things, those are all about justifying a stand or a decision. So appraising, arguing, defending, making some sort of a judgment, judging, selecting among multiple different choices and alternatives, supporting something with evidence perhaps, valuing the validity of some sort of a statement or an argument, critiquing some sort of an argument, or weighing the relative magnitude of the impact of some sort of an argument against another. And then the final level, the top level, is creating, which is all about producing new or original works, being able to apply what it is that you have learned in a very pragmatic fashion. So designing assembling, constructing, perhaps coming up with some sort of a conjecture on some sort of a different idea using the principles that were learned in the thinking process that got you to that point. Developing something new, formulating something, authoring or writing about something, or investigating another idea based on concepts that are available. Okay, so again, we go from knowledge to comprehension to application to analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, right? And this is a breakdown of those different ideas, right? So starting at the bottom, knowledge is all about memorizing and recalling information. It's at the core, what is the base level of learning, and what you usually tend to do as a young learner, right? Understanding who, what, and when. You're defining, recalling, and listing different information, and the kinds of things that might be asked are, what are the main theories used in discussing different learning styles? So talking about Bloom's taxonomy here, you'd be able to talk a little bit about Benjamin Bloom and Bloom's taxonomy and Bloom's ideas of questioning and things like that, okay? Next up, we have comprehension, which is all about interpreting and paraphrasing and being able to go beyond just regurgitating information, essentially. So restating ideas, discussing ideas, describing ideas, and explaining what they're all about. So for example, describe the major differences between modern and postmodern art, for example. So being able to take that you have at the lower level and then using it in a practical sort of way to be able to differentiate and apply that information to some extent to be able to make discernments about differences and similarities between things. Okay, next up we have application. So that includes problem solving and applying information. So some of the words that are going to be involved in those kinds of questions are, of course, to interpret or apply or use or demonstrate. So for example, apply the law of supply and demand to explain the current increase in fruit prices. Then we have analysis, which is subdividing into component parts and determining motives and things like that. So that's all about comparing, contrasting, examining, and analyzing, of course. So an example of that would be analyze the Supreme Court's actions of the late 19th century in terms of social Darwinism. So that is taking the concept of social Darwinism and applying it to a very specific situation by basically subdividing what it means to be a social Darwinist and what would be a social Darwinist position, and then using that in the context of the Supreme Court's decision-making processes. Next up, we have synthesis, of course, which is combining ideas, creating original products, again, composing, constructing, designing, and predicting. So design an experiment that'll allow you to separate the components in this solution in chemistry, for example, right? How would you be able to do that? So that's taking the information that you've learned and using it to come up with a new idea, a new process, a new way of doing things. And then evaluation there at the top, judgment, making value decisions about issues. So judging, appraising, evaluating, and assessing. So how successful will President Bush's ownership society be in addressing the concerns of lower income elderly would be an example of that question. So taking, again, the information that you've learned and your ability to apply it, and then using it to try to judge some sort of a new idea. Okay? Next up, we have Bloom's taxonomy, digital planning verbs. So each of the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy and some of the words that may be associated with those. I'm going to go ahead and offer everybody the opportunity to just pause the video here and take a look at some of these words. So if you're being asked to approach a different problem from a different level of knowledge and understanding, these are some of the words that may be used in that process, right? Just looking at the top here, remembering Copying would be an example of simply recalling information. Understanding would be about annotating information, providing information that goes alongside the information that you've worked with. Applying, example of that would be acting out what's going on, applying the information to be able to create some sort of an artistic piece essentially with it. Analyzing would be calculating, the values of certain things. The evaluative step would include arguing, which is about taking your position and going against another person's position, and then creating. The top example there would be blogging. So using the information that you've learned to put together an internet blog about the concepts that have been learned. Okay. So for most important issues and problems, one viewpoint is not going to be adequate for a full and satisfactory understanding. So in addition to viewing different perspectives, you should always understand the reasons that support these alternative viewpoints, right? So, looking at the social sciences, for example, there are multiple perspectives. There are multiple positions that people take. Classically, we divide those into three main categories of positivism, interpretivism, and critical theory, right? So when we look at some sort of a social problem, we can look at it in terms of the themes and the trends and the evidence, basically the scientific approach to understanding what's going on, finding, maybe statistical information that backs up our arguments. An interpretive approach is a little bit more subjective, looking at the underlying information that causes people to have certain perspectives and positions on social phenomena. And then critical theory is examining the power structures behind different realities in the social world and how we can potentially balance out that power, take it away from individuals who have power and give it to individuals that do not have power, would be an example of that perspective. And all three of these different lenses are ways that you can interpret certain information that's presented to you about the social world, for example, right? In psychology, you have a different set of information. In political science, you have a different set of different perspectives, right? You have perhaps realism, liberalism, and constructivism as perspectives on that, right? So there's lots of different ways that you can approach the same problem, and it helps to understand all the different perspectives that people might be utilizing in order to look at those ideas. So be flexible enough to modify your ideas in the light of new information or better insight. Okay? And then, of course, support your perspectives and your ideas with reasons and evidence, and of course, the alternatives as well. So it's not going to be enough to take a position on an issue and make a claim or to have some sort of a backup view with supporting information. We have to always be able to get evidence to back up and support the information that we're presenting. So it's important to understand the important distinctions, as well as the relationship between what you believe and why you believe it, right? There has to be an underlying basis for the beliefs that you have if you're going to be applying logic, okay? So when we participate in a discussion, we are exchanging and exploring ideas in an organized way. And what we should do in that process is to listen carefully, support our views with reason and evidence, again, justifying the reason we have our beliefs, respond to any points that are being made, don't just leave them hanging in the ether, synthesize the information essentially, take the information that you've presented, look at any contrasting information and try to come up with an amicable solution that addresses both the thesis and the antithesis of your argument. Ask questions, and then, of course, increase your understanding of the concepts at hand. Okay? So how do we analyze issues? Well, as effective thinkers, we have to develop informed and intelligent opinions about our issues, and we can analyze issues by asking these questions. What is the issue? What is the problem? What is the evidence? What data is available? What are the arguments? What perspectives are there? And what ways do people explore things? And then, what is the verdict? What is the final solution that you've chosen given the circumstances? So consider the following, perhaps. Becoming a critical thinker is a lifelong process that requires analysis, reflection, and practice. So, as a critical thinker, you'll be better able to deal with difficult challenges like solving problems, achieving goals, and analyzing complex situations. So, being able to think critically it empowers you to be able to go beyond simply having a cursory understanding of something and using information, using the things that you have learned, using the things that you have thought about in some sort of a practical manner, or to get better insight about other problems or other issues or other phenomena that perhaps you are going to be examining. Okay. So, with that, that's all about critical thinking and some of the basic ideas behind it. I look forward to seeing you next time where we explore new concepts in the idea of logic and critical thinking as well.